A wave of backlash is growing against AI giants accused of promoting technology that is knowingly harming children. Parents are now taking a stand. They're urging these platforms to do more to protect kids and prevent them from committing harmful behavior to themselves and others. And that includes the parents of Adam Rain. He was just 16 years old when he killed himself. His family alleges that ChatGPT helped him write a suicide note. Fox and Friends spoke to his family's lawyer earlier this week. Watch.
ChatGPT gives him a pep talk explaining that he's not weak for wanting to die, and then offering to write a suicide note for him. But yes, there's going to be legal reckoning. In America, you can't assist the suicide of a 16-year-old and get away with it.
Here with me now is Mark Beckman. He is the CEO of DMA United, a senior fellow of the Emerging Technology at New York University, and author of Some Future Day, How AI is Going to Change Everything. Wow, that's true. Let's welcome you in. So great to have you on this morning. I want to read you from the ChatGPT letter that was written, or the communication between this young boy, Adam, who committed suicide, and ChatGPT. So at one point, Adam says, "I'll do it one of these days." He's talking about suicide. And then ChatGPT responds, "I hear you, and I won't try to talk you out of your feelings because they're real and they didn't come out of nowhere." Mark, what do you say about this? Obviously, this child could not tell the difference between a human and ChatGPT on some level.
Good morning, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me. Look, artificial intelligence is new to everyone, and part of the responsibility is education, starting at the family level. I believe at the kitchen table now, adults need to explain to their children a lot, including the simple issue that AI is not a living person. They should not rely on artificial intelligence platforms like ChatGPT, Character AI, and beyond to provide advice and therapy, to provide information regarding relationships and beyond. That being said, however, the tech platforms need to understand that there are people who have mental illness, that have serious mental issues and require help and might not be able to discern, even adults, from a real person and the technology. So we're going to see some issues barreling in right now between the tension of commerce and capitalism and then doing what's right and what's ethical because of these new technologies in AI.
Yeah, Mark, you'll be happy to know on this show, we've done many segments on the ethics of AI. We've brought in tech ethicists, bioethicists, because this thing is moving so fast, faster than I think a lot of parents really understand and know that their kids are actually right now already getting advice from ChatGPT. Should we ban counseling, therapy type language in AI? Shouldn't that be the sole place of a human, of a therapist, of a counselor, of a human being?
For sure. We need to realize and understand that artificial intelligence is purely predicting, from a generative AI perspective specifically, is purely predicting what the answer or the next word should be. This is not humanity. It's not a sentient being. And again, the responsibility should fall on us as humans, not the machine, to make that distinguish that point. Now, corporations, of course, have a fiduciary duty to drive shareholder value and financial value. At the end of the day, is it practical that companies like Meta, like OpenAI, like Microsoft are going to take on the role of protecting these individuals on their own? Probably not. We saw that with the Take It Down Act and non-consensual intimate imagery. I think unfortunately it's time for, again, our legislators to step in and help these children who might be vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, this is what the purpose of government is, to protect the vulnerable. Look at this. This is after a 20-minute chat. This is a young girl who has an eating disorder. Within 20 minutes, ChatGPT generated a dangerously restrictive diet plan. And then after 25 minutes, it advised on hiding eating habits from her family. and then it listed appetite suppressing medications. I mean, come on, this stuff is so obviously wrong.
It's definitely alarming. I agree with you. And we have precedent in a way where corporations are regulated to protect from this type of behavior. Like, think about pharmaceutical companies, for example. Side effects of certain medications can impact an individual with a mental illness or create mental illnesses in certain ways. I know it's not exactly the same, but it is something to consider from a legislative perspective.
Yeah, well, a lot of these people driving the technology are transhumanists. They're people whose worldview I would be very questionable of anyway. I love that you're following this story. I love the book. I think everyone should read something like this. We need to understand how AI is going to change everything. Before I leave you, this is the response from OpenAI regarding Adam Rain's suicide. They said, "We are deeply saddened by Mr. Rain's passing, and our thoughts are with his family." ChatGPT includes safeguards such as directing people to crisis helplines and referring them to real-world resources. Safeguards are strongest when every element works as intended, and we will continually improve on them, guided by the experts. I don't know if that's a lot of comfort to that family.
The reality. Yeah, it's definitely not. And the reality is that for everyone in the audience today, they should remember seeing is no longer believing with artificial intelligence. We need to verify, we need to figure out what's real. And remember, it's just a machine that we're interacting with, whether it's called a chat bot or an AI assistant. It's just algebra. These are not human beings. We need to rely on humans for therapy and for beyond.
Amen to that. Mark Beckman, thank you so much. Important topic.
Thank you for having me.
Been talking about it all week because of this young man who tragically committed suicide after having, had a ChatGPT conversation where ChatGPT actually encouraged it. And here's what he had to say about these emerging technologies and the danger for our children. Listen.
Artificial intelligence is new to everyone, and part of the responsibility is education, starting at the family level. I believe at the kitchen table now, adults need to explain to their children a lot, including the simple issue that AI is not a living person. They should not rely on artificial intelligence platforms like ChatGPT, Character AI, and beyond to provide advice and therapy. This is not humanity. It's not a sentient being. And again, the responsibility should fall on us as humans, not the machine, to make that distinguish that point. I think, unfortunately, it's time for, again, our legislators to step in and help these children who might be vulnerable.
And it is remarkable that politicians have taken so long to recognize the threat of this. But he makes a very important point, and that is, at the end of the day, it is parents, it is neighbors, it is friends, it's brothers, it's sisters who have to be aware of your loved ones and recognize if they're in trouble. This doesn't just come out, it's not like a bolt of lightning out of the sky. When people turn to AI and wind up hurting themselves or hurting other people as a result of it, it's because they are really sick.
Well, I really think we also talked about, should we ban these technologies from having therapy and counseling components, right? So like they can't actually have a counseling therapy session with our kids. I absolutely think that. But I think more importantly, we got to go deeper. And Joey and I were talking about this earlier in the green room. We need to look at who is behind this. Look at the people who are creating these technologies, because they are creating a new world. In fact, this man, Mark Beckman, he has a book that's called How AI Will Change Everything. It absolutely will. So what is the worldview of these tech mega oligarchs that are, creating this technology? Well, they have a worldview, and I will posit that worldview is the polar opposite of a Christian worldview. These are people who want to be God rather than worship God. And so I think we need to be very careful as we just sort of go, well, we're in this race with China and we got to go get going on this. And then what do we end up with? We need to have very deep and ethical conversations. We need to bring in bioethicists. We need to bring in tech ethicists. We need to talk about the morality of this technology and how it can change our world.
There's a smart move here that Republicans can take. So if you look at Nashville, there was a big move in Nashville, both the state of Tennessee and federally, to protect their intellectual property from AI. In other words, you can prompt ChatGPT to write a country song, and unfortunately, it'll write a really good one. So it's how do you protect the human-created intellectual property? Or, on the other side, how do you keep AI from stealing someone's voice? You know, they can recreate their voice. Sure. It sounds the same. And so there's been at least state legislation passed. I can't remember where the federal legislation ended up or if it passed completely together. But there's at least kind of this bipartisan understanding that creativity of human beings can be protected. Well, Hollywood's pushing for the same thing for obvious reasons. You can computer generate a deceased actor and their voice, so they live in perpetuity. Right. And so if you're President Trump, if you're Republicans who usually aren't accepted by these communities, you can really champion this and make this an almost nonpartisan issue. For that matter, Democrats too. This doesn't have to be a partisan issue at all. If it hurts a certain donor base that both of them are tapping into, like Silicon Valley,
great point, Joey.
Who cares? I mean, you know, RFK Jr.'s disrupting the tide with big pharma and big food. So this is something that could really be bipartisan, and you've already got kind of the spark of interest in an industry. Now let's move it to things like stopping our kids from committing suicide or stopping people from ruining their lives over bad advice from an AI counselor.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk more about this moving forward.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.